Hello. So today we're going to talk about systemic COVID dismantling from about mid-April to the present time, which is early May. And we're going to begin with this article right here from Newsmax, where back in April 22nd of 2025 this year, RFK Jr. is mulling pulling the COVID vax recommendation for kids. So I initially pulled this article because it gives us an inclination into what RFK Jr. is thinking and what his opinions are, where he wants to rescind the COVID-19 vaccine from the federal government's list of recommended immunizations for children, where he claims that COVID vaccines are inappropriate for 6-year-old children who basically have a zero risk of COVID. So there's a couple fold issue in this. First, we know that children that are infants that are under 6 months of age, which currently cannot get COVID vaccinated, are at the highest risk level. They're at the highest risk level with 65 plus and over, as groups that are very vulnerable to COVID, that have very severe illness and die most frequently of the COVID infection. And we can't give them vaccination, so maternal vaccination is really the only way for them to get COVID antibodies to get protection against COVID exposures, since doctors are not masking in hospitals around infant newborns. They're at a very high risk. So these children, he's saying they basically have a zero risk for COVID for 6-year-olds. So this is not true. We know that young children have the exact same long COVID rates as adults, and now they're starting to actually outpace the adult rates because they've been having more frequent infections, and we know that with each subsequent infection, you have a higher rate of long COVID risk. And additionally, we're seeing more complications in children, such as strokes, heart attacks, and other blood and vessel related issues. And these statements are coming just 1 week after ACIP's released suggested recommendation, where they're going to shift to a risk based approach, where they're really just going to focus on the elderly and the immunocompromised. So this is saying that, oh, we're not even going to look at children as vulnerable populations, which they are because they're very immune naive. And this is really bad. Like, this is something that I just don't understand. Next up, we learned that some COVID-19 services are ending after federal funding cuts announced on the same day. So a while back, you'll remember that there were COVID testing kits and COVID testing kiosks that were put up in places that were going to be funded by the government and stocked by the government. Well, now those kiosks are going to be closed. And other service that will end will include the mobile vaccine deployments. So these are going to be little vaccine buses that go around and help vaccinate communities that are at risk. COVID contact tracing, which is very important. So that's going away even more than it was already. And then COVID vaccine and testing registration system. So this is going to be so we can't even tell how many vaccines are going to be out there. So that, like, we already had lost our COVID vaccine registration system, but now we had a system in place where what was happening is that people were just getting cold called, and that's how we were getting our COVID vaccination rates. Where people are just calling random numbers and be like, hey, did you get COVID vaccinated? And they'd be like, yes, no. And then they'd record it. So they're getting rid of that. And then we have another direct hit against COVID vaccinations from this article here in Biz and Tech. We have FDA scrutiny of Novavax COVID-19 vaccine, which sparks uncertainty about the other shots, predominantly Pfizer and Moderna. So first, I'm going to start off saying that I'm very frustrated about this because Novavax has been struggling as a company themselves to produce sufficient data and high quality data. This has been an ongoing struggle for them and an ongoing issue for them. That's why they've been stuck at an emergency use authorization for so long. But they finally got their stuff together and put together a randomized controlled trial, got that going. But now the FDA is saying, oh, that randomized controlled trial that you did is not sufficient enough. But since this hasn't been released, I can't look through that data and see, oh, they really messed up that study or not. But this is now being leveraged to try and get away from Novavax, which is weird because everyone in the MAGA movement has been going, oh, well, we need protein-based vaccines. This is a protein-based vaccine. They've been demonizing mRNA, even though there's nothing wrong with mRNA vaccines. And this has been like the natural alternative, but now they're saying, no, we don't want even Novavax anymore, which doesn't make any sense. But to get back to my point, the part that really frustrates me is that Novavax has been actually struggling as a company. They haven't been meeting the data requirements, but now the FDA has made this move, which has moved the goalpost further down the line. So while they haven't been meeting it before, they finally met their standards. Then the FDA is saying, hey, we're going to shift the standards to this even higher standard, without like giving us full transparency into what was not good or good about the Novavax submitted data, and it's screwing everything up. And we'll go through that in a second. So, what the FDA is asking was they wanted the Novavax Corporation to produce new clinical trials of its most current vaccine after the agency grants full approval. So they could grant full approval, but they would be then required to produce a randomized controlled trial based off of the current vaccine. So why is this something that matters? Why is this out of the norm? Well, it's because you've already completed this. They're saying that what you completed before was at a different variation of the vaccine, so it's not equivalent to what you're not producing, which just has a strain change. So what happens with these vaccines is you test out to see if they're good or not. So usually you'll do a randomized controlled trial, which will be like a placebo or the standard of care at the time. This will be important later. And then you compare that against your actual vaccine. And you randomize the groups so people don't know. You blind the groups so the researchers don't know. And then you sort of undo this all behind the scenes to do a statistical analysis on the data to show if it actually has an effect or not. So once you meet the standard, your vaccine is good. You don't have to repeat all that stuff because it costs a lot of money. It's unnecessary. That's the biggest point. It's unnecessary because they've already proved that it works. All you're doing at that point is saying, all right, so we have this spike protein originally. This is the, we'll call it the Wuhan original COVID virus spike protein. So this is the red pen. But then it mutated further down the line. So we decided that, oh, we're going to pick XBB 1.5 as this blue pen. So this is going to be the new spike protein that's being produced. Everything else in this vaccine component is the same. We just swapped out the spike protein from red to blue. And then more currently, they went from blue to black. So it's the same exact thing that's being produced and that's being plated and that's being tested on these protein adjuvants on sopanin, which is just like tree bark. So this is all they're doing. They're swapping out 1 to 1 to 1, one tiny component that doesn't matter. What you showed that this works with the original stuff is still good for what you're doing right now. And saying that it's no longer good and you have to redo everything from scratch because it's a completely brand new vaccine, that's ludicrous. That's nonsense because everything else is exactly the same. You're just changing out what the strain selection is to be better matched to current circulating variants. That's the whole kit and caboodle. So now that they're making this standard for Novavax, then this is also going to be applied to things like Pfizer and Moderna. And then if you extrapolate outwards, okay, so we have these COVID vaccines. Well, what about influenza? What about measles? What about everything else? Influenza is the most relevant one because that one you also select new strains every single year, and it's the most known, so it's the easiest comparable example. So you have these strain selection committees that, which is VRBPAC typically, the Vaccine Review for Biological something committee. Don't have it completely memorized, but this VRBPAC, VRBAC, they select strains for the vaccines like influenza, like COVID, and it's based off of current circulating variants so that you can have a well-matched vaccine for the current time. Well, what happens when you make a thing like this is that it takes about, on the fastest track, if everything goes perfectly, you could do it within about 6 months, maybe 8 months. If things get messed up, so let's say a lot of people drop out of your trial, let's say that something went wrong with one of the manufacturers, so it messed up a control arm of your study, so you have to repeat the control arm of your study, then that pushes out to a year, maybe a year and a half. And that's once you get everything, all your ducks in a row to be able to even start the study. So on a conservative path, it takes about a year to a year and a half to do a full randomized control trial like this, which means that once you picked out that new spike protein. So fortunately, I have a lot of markers and stuff around me right now for the next current circulating strain. So this is going to be for the 2025-2026 spike protein. Well, you have to do all this stuff. You won't finish this for at the best, most extreme pace, 6 months. At the average pace, about a year, year and a half. This is not going to be ready for the current year. This would only be ready for next year, and then you'd have to pick a new strain selection, which will be this scraper right here for the next protein, and it'll ruin the whole thing. You can't. The whole point of this is to be agile, to be able to switch out these components very quickly, to be able to match it to current variants so that you have a well-matched vaccine to what is currently happening. And this is why it's so important and why this is something that can't happen. Like, this effectively will kill all vaccines. Because if we have a new emergent virus like bird flu, or measles mutates into a completely brand new strain and they're having this requirement, you won't have a vaccine ready in time to be able to inoculate the population against it. So the disease will just wipe through the communities and hurt everybody, and we won't have something that'll be ready, even though like we have the manufacturing, we have the technology, we have everything else that's ready to go. But this bureaucracy is going to be holding everything up. And that's not good. That's not how science goes. And then like companies look at this and say, well, we're not even going to make something that's going to be well matched. Why should we even bother? Is what's going to happen. So this is why this is such a big deal. And then looping back to that point, I told you to remember several minutes back. So the reason that we do randomized control trials is because we're not sure if something is going to work or not. So we're testing, is it going to work? Is it going to be something that is effective? So you either do a control, like a placebo, and that's what they're recommending in this. They want to do placebo control, so it's doing nothing versus doing something. And I told you to remember that, or these current standard of care. So this brings in ethics, which is very important. So it is very unethical to run a placebo-controlled trial for a vaccine when you already know that the vaccine works. That means that you're doing something less than the current standard of care, and you're allowing people to get infected with the disease, not knowing if they have protection or not, because you don't tell the people. It's randomized, it's double-blinded, so the patients don't know, the doctors don't know. They get a vaccine or they get saline injection of just sugar water, essentially. And some people are protected, some people aren't. They're thrown out into the community to be in contact with viruses, in this case COVID, and then they would get the COVID infection, and then you would be comparing people that got COVID infection and got the saline injection versus people that got the COVID infection and got the actual vaccine. But when we have a standard of care, which is getting vaccinated with something that has been shown to work prior, that means that what you're doing is less than the standard of care, and that's unethical. The reason it's unethical is because you're actively experimenting on people in a way that is not beneficial to the people that you're experimenting on, because you're literally using those people as guinea pigs, saying, hey, these people, we didn't give them something to protect themselves. They got really, really sick. Hey, look, the vaccine works. That's not ethical. You're literally just taking people, throwing them away just to see what'll happen. That's not moral. That's not a just society. That's not something that is ethical. That's something that should put people in jail. That type of science. I don't know how else to say it. That is unethical. And next, we also learned that HICPAC, which is the committee that sets the PPE, personal protective equipment standards for hospital systems and nursing care facilities and places like that. Basically, where you have patient control, patient access, those types of places. They set the PPE standards against infectious diseases and other diseases. That committee is going to be terminated. So the committee members have received termination notices, and also this is following the last minute cancellation of the previous HICPAC meeting that was scheduled to take place March 6th to 7th of 2025. So this is just, again, showing that they're dismantling the public health infrastructure at the seams. the National Institute of Health, the NIH, is going to end billions of dollars in foreign research grants. And this move is going to jeopardize thousands of projects on infectious diseases, cancers, and more. So the reason why this is so impactful is that it's going to have a huge detrimental effect to our current scientific infrastructure. So this is going to have huge impacts on grants at universities. It's going to mostly impact young researchers, so people that are working to get tenure at their research institutions. They are going to lose funding and grants dollars to be able to finish their research. People that are going to be in phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials are going to be left unmoored. They're not going to be able to finish their studies because the grant dollars will have been cut off. So those people that were trying to seek like cancer treatments that were experimental as a last ditch hope are going to be cut off at the roots. They're not going to have that option anymore. They're going to be just cut off. And then for any infectious diseases like COVID that is currently going, measles that is currently spreading, bird flu, which is going largely unmonitored and undetected within the US, mpox, things like that are going to just take us by storm and by surprise because we're not going to have the monitoring network through this infectious disease network that's going to be funded. So this is all very bad. And then since the labs, the grants won't be there, then the students that are trying to become scientists will no longer have that option because a lot of the times you get picked up by a research grant. You don't necessarily go into a project knowing what you're going to be studying. You pick a research grant and then you go and say, hey, I want to work for you. You have this grant. I'll work on the grant and do the research for that. And that's how you get your foot into the world of science. And then more directly, the US is halting funding for the development of new COVID-19 vaccines, where 3 companies were issued stop work orders for developing next-gen COVID-19 vaccines through Project NextGen, which was an initiative for the US Center for the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. So this was millions of dollars that were allocated to this. The 3 companies, one was Vaxart, which is working to develop an oral vaccine pill. There was Castlevax, which is working on an intranasal vaccine. So that was the sprayable nose vaccine that people have been raving about wanting. And then GeoVax is developing a vaccine designed to be effective in immunocompromised people. So all of these companies were issued stop work orders. And now they're in flux where this stop work order will either be extended, canceled, or terminated within 90 days. It's most likely that these companies will then receive termination notices for their funding, which will effectively kill off the research for these 3 different avenues. And then in a weird move with the HHS under RFK, they're going to be adopting a universal vaccine platform that's going to be focusing on whole viruses. So this would be not like, so when you put this into perspective, Novavax targets just the spike protein. The mRNA vaccines target just the spike protein. So they're saying, oh, this small segment of the virus, not good enough. We want the whole virus to interact with the immune system because it'll be better that way when you have a whole thing. But the issue with a lot of these whole virus platforms from like the past is like they're inactivated live viruses, or you can't have that with something like COVID because if any small part of the virus is still active, then it's going to be damaging you and hurting you when you get the vaccine. That's why we've switched to different variants of vaccines over the years. This is a very old mindset. But the thing that stood out to me was this call out for beta propylactone, BPL inactivated, because I hadn't heard that before. But when I was just doing a quick search for it, I saw this article from 1995 where beta propylactone alters the capability of residual contaminating cell DNA. And I was like, oh, this is the whole Ladapo thing where he just made up a bunch of bullshit where he's saying that, the COVID vaccines have segments of simian DNA in them, and then they're going to insert and alter your genomes. So what's happening is we're having this merging of junk science together, which is why they're focusing on this beta propylactone to say that, oh, ours aren't made with gene altering substances. But again, this whole virus take is not good for a lot of viruses because you can't effectively neutralize the whole virus. And sometimes that can't even be sustained. Like sometimes it can go through a reversible process. Sometimes you miss within your sample and leave a couple that are still live activated. And those ones that could then generate illness in you if you got vaccinated with it, which is why we focus on things like just using the inactivated version of the spike protein with the mRNA, which is perfect because with mRNA it literally creates a non-fusion producing spike protein. So let me rephrase that. So it there's the open configuration of the spike protein where it can then bind with you to your receptors and then cause issues. If it's stuck in a fusiform state where it's closed, you still have the spike protein that can be identified by the immune system and then can be reactive with whatever you encounter in the wild. But it's not going to bind to anything. It's not going to actively harm you in any way, shape, or form. And this is why we focus on just these small segments with mRNA and with the Novavax as well. They took a fusiform locked configuration, plated it, and just presented it to the immune system on tree bark, essentially, little things of tree bark. So that's weird. Just yesterday is that, recalling that the Trump administration had cut 90% of NIOSH, who does PPE, mask fits, making sure that N95 masks are up to a certain quality and standard, among many, many other things. We covered that in the previous video. I'll have it tagged in the captions below so you can look back to it. But they had cut off 90% of the staff, but now they've laid off most of the remaining staff, where the chart here from Alexander Tin. So if we blow that up, they cut all of these remaining departments. The only ones that still remain are the World Trade Center Health Program with Health Benefits Branch, Research and Evaluation, Business Operations, and then the Division of Compensation, Analysis, and Support. So these are just like the finance offices, it looks like, but every other division has been terminated. So I'd say probably all but like maybe less than 1% of the original workforce for NIOSH is terminated. And yeah, that's our update. That was a lot, and unfortunately, it was all bad news.